Hi everyone, and welcome back to the quadratic series for 5.3 mathematics. In this video we are going to look at factorizing expressions. Now, factorizing expressions is the reverse of expanding expressions. So in one previous video we looked at expanding our grouping symbols. In this video we are actually going to look at the direct opposite. So essentially this is what we do to get rid of grouping symbols sometimes, or to put grouping symbols back in to make something a little bit easier to work with. Okay, so let's look at some examples to see how we're going to do this. Our first example here, we need to factorize by taking out common factors. Now remember that factors, factors are sets of numbers or terms, numbers or pronumerals that make up another term. Okay, so we're putting numbers and pronumerals together to make another term. It could be two numbers, two pronumerals. It doesn't really matter what combination it is. It's just things that make up another term. So here we have minus 3x minus 12. So our two terms, we've got minus 3x and minus 12. And we need to take out a common factor. Now, this one's actually pretty easy. Minus 3 is pretty obvious because minus 3 goes into minus 3x and it also goes into minus 12. So our common factor here is going to be minus 3. So if I take out that minus 3 and I put it outside of brackets, so I'm going to take that minus 3 and I'm going to put it outside of some brackets. What's left over inside of the brackets, it's what's left over from my expression. So minus 3x divided by minus 3 gives me just x. And then minus 3, or minus 12 rather, divided by minus 3, well, that's going to give me plus 4. And that's how it's done. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm going minus 3x over minus 3 and minus 12 over minus 3. That's what's going to get me these bits and pieces. So we're looking for something that goes into both of the terms to make things a bit easier. Okay. Our next common factor, we've got 20a squared and 30a. Now a is definitely going to be part of my common factor. And then the other part of my common factor is a number that goes into both 20 and 30. And it really should be the highest common factor. So let's even make a note of that. Use the highest common factor. So the highest one between 20 and 30 is actually 10. So that's what we're going to use. So to get our bracket, so we're going to have 10a outside of our bracket, and we want what's inside of the bracket. So we're going to take that 20a squared and divide it by 20a. Now we do have an a left over because of the a squared, but we also have only 2 of those a's because 20 divided by 10 is 2. Then I'm going to have 30a divided by 10a. Now those a's cancel out, so no more a's. 30 divided by 10, well, that's going to be 3. Our next one along is a little bit easier because our highest common factor is pretty clear, is going to be x plus 1. So what's in that bracket is essentially the common factor. So we bring that out, and then inside is what's left over. That's our 2 and our minus a. There we have it. Bob's your uncle. We've grouped things together. Things are in there. Now this one's a difference of 2 squares. Alright, so we might need to look for some common factors. Essentially what we're looking for though is we want an x squared minus a 4 squared. So we find out what those squares are. Now because it's the minus in the middle, we need opposite signs in our brackets. So we can have x minus 4 and x plus 4. Not really worried about which way around they go, because it's multiplication, it will get to the same spot. For our next one, let's reduce it out of the squared bits. So I'm going to have, well, what's the square root of 9? The square root of 9 is 3. And then we have a, and then we square that whole thing. Minus, what, the square root of 4? Well, that's 2. And then we have b, and that whole thing. And again, we've got that negative in the middle because it's the difference. We want 3a. Let's do it plus this time. And then we do the minus version. So this one's that little bit trickier because we're finding the square root. Finding the square root to factorize. Okay, so in this one we have 12y. Now 12, it doesn't have a square root, so it's going to stay outside of a bracket here. And I'm going to take that y squared because I'm looking for that common factor now. 1200, well, 12 is a common factor in 1200. You just times that by 100. So we've pulled that one out. We're going to keep that 12 out. And then we're going to have the same idea. So this little bit in here, we're going to have the y all squared minus 10 squared, which is going to give us y plus 10 and y minus 10. So inside that bracket, we're going to do what we did in the first two. Now for the last one, all right, we are going to see slight difference again. All right, so we've got the x plus 3 squared already. Then 4, well, that's 2 squared. Alright, if we factorize out our x plus 3 squared, alright, we get all of that. So now we get let's see, we're going to have x plus 3 minus 2 and x plus 3 plus 2. Alright, so we're going to have x plus 1 and x plus 5. Okay, it does look a little bit weird because these are the difference between the squares. We don't really need this line in here though, so let's just get rid of it. That was a bit superfluous, didn't really need it because we've got this as its own term. So this is like the y from over here or the x from the first one. And what we're actually doing, what's actually happening here, okay, is we're going to use a rule. Alright, we're going to use the a squared minus b squared equals a plus b, a minus b rule. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're actually applying this and we're saying that a equals x plus 3 as a term and the b equals 2. And then we're simplifying. Okay, so we got rid of that superfluous line, we didn't really need it. We've replaced it with what's actually going on in that process. These are tricky, so keep following along. Rewatch the videos if you have to. Now we've got difference of two squares that are going to have some surds in them. Same basic idea. Okay. So we're going to have x squared minus the square root of 10 squared, which then will give me x plus the square root of 10, x minus the square root of 10. So this is a little bit of a wonky one, but break it up first. Find the square root of your number, put it in brackets, chuck on the squared, because it's going to give us a little bit more of an idea. Same idea here. X all squared minus the square root of 24 all squared. We break that out. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify my surd. So I'm going to leave the x all squared in there for the moment. But here, 24, oops, I can do that. Well, that's 4 lots of 6 all squared. 4, the square root of 4 is going to be 2, but the square root of 6 is going to be the square root of 6. There's no set square there. So then we have x plus 2 times root 6, x minus 2 times the square root of 6. Now we haven't done a lot of work in simplifying surds, so that might be something that trips us up a little bit later on. Now for this one, we're going to have x minus 1 all squared, that's going to be our a, minus the square root of 5 squared. Now there is no square root of 5 and you can't simplify that one any further. So that's going to become x minus 1 plus the square root of 5, x minus 1 minus the square root of 5. So using that idea again of a plus, or a minus it should be. Let me start that one again. Of a squared minus b squared being a plus b, a minus b. A equals, for our purposes, x minus 1, b equals square root of 5. Okay, so that's that last question done. Again, just that little bit tricky. But find those common factors, use the square roots, and you'll be just fine. This last one is a grouping question. We're going to factorize this one through grouping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this question. So I've got x squared minus x plus ax minus a. And I'm going to rewrite that as a group. Alright, I'm going to put the groupings like this. So I'm going to put some groups in. And then I'm going to factorize individually. So x squared minus x, I'm going to factorize that out. We're going to have x outside of x minus 1. And then I'm going to have a, because that's common, x minus 1. And you can see there that there's a common factor between those two sections. Okay. Then we have x minus 1, that common factor that we just found. And then we're going to have x plus a. And I've just added an extra symbol in there that I didn't need. So there you have it. That one's a little bit on the trickiest side. You do need to look at the grouping. And all we did there was we did this section, then we did this section. So we did it in groups. Sometimes you need to rearrange to be able to put it in those groups, but we did them in groups. Alright, so our highest common factor here was x, and our highest common factor here was a. That's it. That's what we're doing for this particular section. Good luck with those questions. Ask plenty of them of your teacher. See you in the next video.